Hi everyone. This is your PowerPoint for Module 6, which is focused on empowerment. If you haven't already done so, please go back and read Chapter 5 in your textbook. That's what your quiz is going to be based on, and it's also what this PowerPoint is going to cover. Okay, so elements of the empowering approach. Social workers use the empowering approach. They apply the ecosystem's perspective to understand the person in their context, the client in the environment. Putting yourself in the client's shoes, seeing the world from their perspective as opposed to imposing our own values, and uncovering strengths. Finding resources within their system and helping clients gain access to resources helps to promote social justice. So we're applying an ecosystem's perspective. We're reflecting our commitment to social justice by helping the clients access their resources and find areas of their life where they can promote change. We're going to identify their strengths both on a personal level as well as on an interpersonal level and hopefully on a political level as well. And we're going to collaborate with the client and acknowledge that the client is the expert. This module really is just providing an overview of what's to come next. So our next few modules are going to focus on each one of these phases. I thought your textbook did a really good job of explaining exactly what empowering practice looks like in each phase, but we are going to go through within the next few weeks kind of some actual concrete strategies that you're going to employ at each one of these phases. But for now, I want you to just focus on understanding that there are 3 phases of empowering practice and kind of what those phases actually mean. And then we'll go more in depth in each of those in the coming weeks. So the dialogue phase is the initial phase. It's also called engagement, and it's when we first engage with the client. We want to make sure we're demonstrating respect and acknowledging that the client is the expert. We're going to define our purpose, why the client is seeking help. So, for example, if you're working in a homeless shelter and the client comes in, your purpose is primarily to find housing for the client. If you're working in a food pantry and the client comes in, your primary purpose is to provide the client with food. So you're defining whatever that primary purpose is, and you're defining your roles in the process. You're going to address any crisis that might be occurring right off the bat. So for instance, if you're working in a food pantry and a client comes in for food, but then also tells you that they lost their housing as of this morning, you're going to refer them to DSS for emergency housing. So that's how we're going to address immediate crisis. And we're going to activate motivation. So just by kind of defining our direction, which is done through acknowledging our purpose and defining our roles, that's going to help to activate the motivation. It's acknowledging that the client has taken the first step in getting help. The next phase is the discovery phase, which is our assessment phase. You often enter into this phase early in the relationship. You might still be building your partnership during this time. Okay, so and when we get up to the module that really focuses on assessment, you're going to learn how to assess a client using an ecosystems framework. But for now, again, I just want you to understand that during the assessment phase, we're learning about the client. We're collecting relevant information. We're exploring their strengths and resources at every level. And we're going to construct a plan. We're going to set goals with the client. And remember, we're doing this as in a collaborative process. So we're not telling the client what the client needs to work on. We're hearing from the client what they want to work on, what their needs are, and we're working with them to develop a plan that's accessible for them, that makes sense for them, and that they can achieve. And then we're going to choose also objectives, so the steps that we need to take in order to achieve their goals, and the actual plan of action. So how are we going to even achieve those objectives, right? Who's responsible for what? We are going to go more into detail about this process as we move forward in the course. And then the development phase is our final phase. It's also called intervention. So the development phase is when we put the plan of action, we put the plan into motion. We're working with the client to access resources and increase the client's sense of power and identifying client achievements and gains, right? So we want to make sure we're acknowledging client success as it happens. So I want to make sure that we understand, though, that these three phases, they they're broken down in distinct ways over the next several chapters and modules so that you can really understand what each phase entails and the strategies that are used in each phase. But I want you to also understand that these phases can overlap, they can be revisited. So in other words, you're going to be assessing from the time the client walks into the office until the client leaves the office. Are they ready to be discharged? So that's going to happen all the time. You're always going to be treating the client with respect, right? So you're always trying to continue to build that therapeutic alliance with the client. You want to make sure that you're treating the client as the expert throughout the length of your engagement. There's no point where you decide, okay, well, the client isn't really holding up their end, so I'm just going to take over as expert now. The client is going to, the relationship is going to come first, and that's going to be a continuing thing that you're going to develop, and you might have ups and downs just like you might in any other human interaction. So these things can go back and forth, but we start with engagement because that's where you're going to understand the skills in really just how you initiate the relationship to begin with, and then the skills of assessment, so how you really learn to see the client within their context, within their environment, and the resources that are available and strengths that are available at every level, and then the intervention. So how do we set goals and objectives, and how do we work towards those things? Okay. And as always, if you have questions about this, please post them in the Q&A forum. Okay, so this chapter I feel like was, because it was an overview, I feel like it's kind of brief, and I think they did a good job of giving an example of what empowering practice looks like in the chapter. But the other thing that I want you to understand at this point is how empowerment is connected to ecosystems and how we use the two together all the time. So just briefly, I want to review how social work is connected to ecosystems and how it really fits so well, because we have the micro, the meso, and the macro levels within the social work profession, as well as within the ecosystems framework, right? Every time we engage a client. So social workers can address an issue at every level as their primary job function. So you might be a social worker at the micro level, at the meso level, or at the macro level. There are jobs that exist at each one of these levels. But for now, just so we can kind of understand how we might look at a specific intervention from any one of those places, I'm going to use gun violence as an example. So if you're a micro level social worker, you might be counseling someone who was a victim of gun violence, or who witnessed gun violence, or who maybe was present at the time of a mass shooting, which has unfortunately become a more common occurrence in our culture. So that might be your job if you were a micro level social worker. You might be doing counseling with someone who's experienced the trauma of a gun violence. If you're a meso level social worker, you might run groups within a school or community that's been impacted by gun violence. And if you're a macro level social worker, you might work within the government to advocate for changes to the laws that are regarding gun control or background checks. So I hope that makes sense. And again, if you have questions, please post them in the Q&A forum. So now, how does ecosystems actually connect to empowerment? So by using the empowering approach, we can help clients recognize their power by locating their strengths and resources to cope with their current situation. And that would be at the micro level, right? And finding ways to advocate for themselves or for a community that they might be a member of to promote social change and social justice. So again, we're going to use the same example, but we're going to look at it as if, like, how your job as a social worker, you can empower clients at the micro level, at the meso level, and at the macro level, even if you're working as a micro level social worker. So I hope that makes sense. Let's walk through it. So our example here is your client recently survived a school shooting. So personal empowerment. So you're working with the client one-on-one on a micro level. You want to acknowledge their strengths, right? You want to acknowledge their survival instincts, whatever coping strategies they're using. I don't know how I would possibly be able to cope with that, and the fact that they're even showing up to meet with you every week is amazing, right? So you want to acknowledge those personal strengths. At the meso level, you can build interpersonal empowerment by connecting the client to a community resource like group counseling. So for example, in a school shooting, hopefully they're going to be running groups within the school because your client is not the only one grieving, your client is not the only one who experienced trauma, and most likely they're going to be having some group counseling within the school that can help the client build relationships and feel that interpersonal empowerment, build their power by feeling less isolated, less alone, and finding ways to connect to other people. Okay, and now political empowerment, which is at the macro level, you can encourage your client to write to your congressman about the laws that they want changed. And so now I want to also make another important point here. You want to be taking on your client's worldview, and you're helping the client find their own power, and that's to promote their agenda, right? So you as a worker, your feeling might be, we need to have stricter gun laws. You can't impose those beliefs onto your client. If your client's belief is, we need to have more armed guards in the school so that we don't have people, to stop the shooters earlier. If that's your client's belief, then you can help your client to engage on a political level to try to advocate for those changes. So we are always advocating on our clients' behalf, but part of empowerment practice is really helping our clients learn how to advocate for themselves or for a community that they're a member of. So in this instance, your client can advocate for herself, or your client can advocate on behalf of the school because they're a student at that school and they're a member of that group. They're a member of a group of students in general, and they're a member of that school specifically, right? So we can help our clients feel empowered on a political or macro level by encouraging them to get involved. Now, part of that means that you first need to be involved and if not directly involved, at least aware of the government processes, of the structures that are involved, and of how one can advocate for yourself. So that's why you take a politics class, and that's why, if you're not already, you should definitely be registered to vote, and you should be voting in the upcoming midterm elections for whatever candidates you believe in. So that's my plug for being actively engaged yourself. Because if you really want to help your clients feel empowered, it starts with us, right? It starts with our own self-awareness, and it starts with our own sense of empowerment. Okay, so this was a pretty short PowerPoint today. I do hope that you really read the chapter carefully and reviewed the example that they gave in the chapter of how these things are applied. And please post your questions on the Q&A forum, and I will definitely address those there, and we're going to delve into each one of these areas, the dialogue phase, the discovery phase, and the development phase within the next few weeks. Thanks so much.